I mean, like I use every possible hour. My Fridays before pay-per-view, it's an 18-hour day, 6 a.m. to midnight, nonstop work.
Today I get the privilege to talk with Jon Anik. Jon has been with the UFC a bit over 10 years, and he's a commentator there. Sits with Joe Rogan and currently with Daniel Cormier at DC, and bring things to life in the living room that when I watch on pay-per-view, I hear your voice on there and the insights and in detail that you bring that I think some people that maybe aren't paying attention, they don't realize the depth of experience that you bring into their living room of making the fight understandable to a mainstream audience and just more accessible and interesting. So I asked you to come chat with me because I see those little nuances as somebody that speaks to the public and spend a lot of time on stage myself, and I really appreciate and respect what you do. But how did you get involved in that? What is some of the background that they should know about Jon?
Well, first of all, it means a lot to be able to sit down with somebody on your level, especially how much you train and the fact that you must find me, to whatever degree, listenable over 7 or 8 hours on a UFC telecast. So I appreciate that. I grew up on the outskirts of Boston, Massachusetts, in the metro west part of Massachusetts. And anyone who doesn't know Massachusetts, it's just a huge sports culture and climate. And I think, like it or not, growing up in Massachusetts, you're a sports fan, and the Boston Celtics were going to be on the TV, and the Red Sox and everybody else, whether I liked it or not. So I grew up in a sports family, and I knew at a pretty young age that I wanted to work in sports. I was on more of a print journalism path to be a sports writer, and then I just ended up running into a lot of people who were better with the pen than I was. But, I got some breaks, eventually gravitated from print journalism, newspaper, to radio, and eventually television, which was not at all the goal. But never did I think I would be doing combat sports. I'm not a lifelong martial artist. I thought I would be doing the stick and ball sports, but I'm certainly thankful that the balls kind of fell the way they did.
Yeah, I think something I respect about what you do that I think a lot of people don't even understand is all the prep work that goes into doing a show. That, like, when there's a pay-per-view event, you and I were at the same pay-per-view event a couple days ago over the weekend. How much prep work goes into that? Do you just show up and just say some random shit when the fight's going on? Or?
Right. Yeah, just show up and talk. That's what a lot of the viewership thinks at times, that we just show up and talk. No, when you have a job that is a dream job of sorts, I think there are a lot of people out there that think they can do it and think that they could do it better. And there probably are some people who could. But all of my anxiety in this job is in the preparation and not the performance. It's not unlike a fighter. You get to the arena and then you get to let your skills shine, but the work is very arduous. We're in a climate right now where oftentimes our matchmakers, these motherfuckers, 15 fights a card times 2, that's 30 athletes, right? And if I'm in a back-to-back situation where I'm doing 2 cards on back-to-back Saturday nights, 56, 58 athletes in a span of 8 days. How much time are you giving each athlete? As much as humanly possible. So I like to tell people that if there was a power outage and a fight card got delayed 5 hours, I could still make use of the extra time. Like, there's always one more interview you can ingest or article you can read. So although it is the devil I know, and it is very different than calling an NFL football game, I'm not sure I'd wish it on my worst play-by-play enemy. It really is a lot. And thankfully, I've been doing it 10 years, and I have a system that, kind of hasn't failed me yet, but it's a lot.
The people that pay attention to what I do, my audience, and I don't love everybody in the audience, by the way. I'm not a mainstream person. I don't want to get along with everybody. Right. It's not my personality. I'd like to talk to people that are high performers. They're already good at something. They want to develop a new skill set that I help people make better decisions in their business life, do better with their finances. So the people that watch me, they're already good at something. They have a good work ethic. They've already learned how to learn. That's really what I mean when I say good at something. They've already learned how to learn, and now they want to do better in their finances. But a commonality is somebody that above average IQ, above average work ethic, and I think something that you could convey uniquely is that preparation or that attention to detail. That there's a lot of people out there, they want to do the new trendy thing in business. I'm not a trendy person.
Yeah,
I like to do the boring shit that works consistently,
right.
Year after year and decade after decade. The longer it's been working, if it's been working for thousands of years, I have more faith it's going to continue to keep working.
Right.
So I like to focus on key principles, strong foundations, and you can do some fancy flair glamour stuff after you have that mastery of that. But without that attention to detail, to have those strong foundations, I don't have much faith in somebody's success in whatever endeavor.
That's why I take a statin for my high cholesterol, because it's been working for 50 years, you know? But yeah, I mean, I sometimes will show up to an event and there will be different anchors from different networks and they'll hop on television and mispronounce the fighters' names. And I think to myself, that would never change for me. If I show up to do an event in whatever sport, at whatever age or stage of my career, and I look down at a fight card or a lineup and I don't know how to pronounce something, I'm going to ask somebody. And I just think there are a lot of people that aren't necessarily willing to do that. And certainly, I think most of my success has been rooted in working hard. Certainly, I think as I've gotten older, maybe I've opened a window where I'll acknowledge some natural ability as an orator. But for the most part, I have built this on hard work. And I have a system where I handwrite everything because I don't necessarily have the greatest memory in the world. And people think my system is antiquated. Well, I still have the job, you know? So I don't know. I've tried to lean into the hard work and preparation. There have been times in my career where I have sort of taken issue with the fact that people would only say I work hard. I said, well, am I any good at the job, or is it really just about hard work? You know what I mean? But I do believe that in order to do what we do and to try to be as listenable as possible and to be as clean as possible over 8 hours in which you're judged over every single goddamn utterance, you better be prepared. And that part of it, the preparation, what I do before I get to the octagon, I can control.
What does that preparation system look like for you? What's that system look like to be as perfect as you can be on game day?
So depending on whether or not I'm in a back-to-back situation, it can start a lot earlier than other times, right? I just had like an off season essentially, so I got to get ahead of the UFC 270 prep because I didn't have a show for 3 weeks before. But usually it starts about 10 or 11 days out. I voiced a lot of the in-arena features that you see, you know, 2 fighters coming up next, fighter X fights fighter Y. That stuff gets voiced on very high-level equipment in my home about 10 days out. Then I print out all the fighter bios, and then I start in a very sort of arduous way writing out my fighter cards. I transfer anything that I think is useful from the UFC fighter bio to my fighter card, and then I have a library of about 6,000 fighter cards at home. And I will take the old card out of the library, see if I have any pertinent notes from that old card. Then the old card gets either thrown away or repurposed to a fan. And while I'm doing that, I'm watching film and trying to ingest any other video interviews or otherwise. You know, certainly if there's a UFC newcomer or a fighter that I've never seen before, that requires a little bit more preparation than, say, the UFC heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou. But I have fighter meetings on Wednesday or Thursday of fight week, and I better show up to that fighter meeting knowing as much as humanly possible about those 12 or 14 athletes, right? I can't walk into a fighter meeting and say, oh, where have you been training? I need to know if they've switched training camps, ideally, before I get in there. Certainly, there are going to be times where things are uncovered in those meetings, but I got to show that athlete the respect. So, and then Friday night is obviously a bear the night before because I'm laying out the scripts, and that doesn't mean our fights are scripted. It means that when we go to a break, I want to maximize every little second. So I might write a bump to a locker room or something like that. But yeah, it's nonstop, man. You know, cram is like a negative verb in broadcasting because it gives off a sort of connotation that you're not preparing in advance. But dude, I fucking cram. I mean, like I use every possible hour. My Fridays before a pay-per-view, it's an 18-hour day, 6 a.m. to midnight, nonstop work.
You know, I did live events for about 6.5 years. I was traveling 51 weeks a year. And I didn't take a week off. I just did a show at home. And I was on stage 180-ish days a year for about 6.5 years. And I was flying about 250,000 miles a year as well. 150,000 on the low end.
Complaining.
And in 2019, I had 250,000 miles and 130-something flights. So I'd be in a different city with, you know, oftentimes different country, went to 66 countries, did events in most of them. And so different city, different country, and you learn nuances about, you know, the audience that you're communicating with. And, you know, I had to learn little nuances that if you're speaking to people in Germany, I don't change my personality, but there's a different way that you convey the same message and same personality to a German audience than, you know, to a Canadian audience, right, for instance, right, you know. And so there's a lot of little nuance like that I had to pick up. And, you know, even after I was doing that, people would say that I got a lot of compliments, that I'm pretty damn good on the stage. people would ask me, they just think it's autopilot or something. And any of the people that traveled with me would know that anytime we did an event, if I talked for, 8 hours that day, and sometimes I talked for longer than that, but if I talked for 8 hours that day to, the first audience, and then, you get rid of some people and you talk to previous clients, and then you maybe do an event for your previous clients and new clients that made a commitment to work with you, going forward. So it might be, 8 hour, 10 hour day. And at the end of that, faithfully, I talked with my team and I said, what did we do really well? And, and what do we need to do better? And I always want to think like, what's one or two things that we did great and 2 or 3 things that we need to do better. And I'm not a big notes guy, but I really took that to heart. I wouldn't care how exhausted I was. I didn't care if I changed, 13 time zones this week. I was always looking for that, how do we make it a little bit better? How do we make it a little bit better? And you strike me as that type of person, that you have that continual improvement in mind of what can I do, which is why you have your job for so long.
Well, thanks. Yeah, we've never had a perfect show, and I'm pretty confident in saying that we're probably never going to have a perfect show. And there are a lot of things that I can do to improve, right? The number one thing is forcibly listening back to yourself. And I don't know how much you've ever watched yourself on stage, and maybe you don't need to watch yourself back in order to improve. But one of my biggest bones to pick with my podcast partner, Kenny Florian, is that he's never listened to an episode of our show in his life. And I find it hard to improve if you're not doing that. I have an identical twin brother who sounds just like me, monozygotic, true identical twins, right? Looks like me, sounds like me. It's my other half, right? So I get pretty sick of the sound of my own voice because I have him and I have myself, but you have to do that. And that's a big part of my process, I have trained in the martial arts, not as much as my boy Derek here, but I have trained in the martial arts a little bit. I think that helps me. But yeah, man, I have run into a lot of broadcasters who prioritize different things during fight week. I'm a Boy Scout on the road, I don't go out to dinner on Friday nights, unless I'm so far ahead of the prep that I can really have a good time. And I don't know. I used to say I'm not as good as everybody else. I can't just get fucking hammered the night before the show and show up and do a good job, I don't know if it's anxiety that has me in my room on Friday nights, but the athletes deserve it too, man. I mean, at the end of the day, right? It's like you get one chance to make a UFC debut, and if your name is Josh Salmon, and may he rest in peace, he doesn't want to be Josh Simone to everybody watching at home. So it's the little things that count, and that's why I just try to lean into that, even if it takes a lot out of me.
You mentioned twice since we've been chatting the idea of feeling a little anxious or anxiety. Is it?
Yeah.
My personality, they say in psychology, you have 3 main negative emotions. It'd be, anger, anxiety, or depression. And just the way my personality seems to be naturally or developed over time, or however that worked out. When there's a break from the status quo that I find undesirable, I tend to get a little angry. I'm like, well, how do I fix that? The first thing I want to do is reality is not the way that I want it to be, and or not the way that I thought it was, or something changed in reality. How do I fix that and get it back to the way that it was, so I can go back to all my other systems and processes?
Sure.
And sometimes a little anger or hostility gets things. I can this, and work hard and lose a little sleep, and everything's good tomorrow. Sometimes there's just a macroeconomic change, or something's changed in the world that a mere mortal can't control.
Right.
And then I might feel 30 seconds of depression.
Right.
And then accept the new reality and say, well, given the circumstance, how do I make the best of things?
Right.
I feel extremely little anxiety. I feel almost no anxiety in life. I'm angry, and then I fix it, or I have to come to terms, and I have a moment of depression, and then I get back to productivity again.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious. You'll have a different perspective that both of us have a goal to have high quality outcomes in the things that we do, and you'll have a different perspective. So I'm really curious what your perspective is from a guy that mentioned anxiety a little bit.
Well, and I'm curious sort of what your emotions or your heart rate might be when you're about to go out on stage versus going to dinner with your girlfriend, right? And maybe pressure is the better word as to what I'm dealing with. But the pressure to perform. I never wanted to be the performer, right? I wanted to be hiding behind a radio microphone essentially and not on television, or hiding behind a pen and being a sports writer. So I never wanted to be on television. My identical twin brother majored in musical theater. They were always flying me to South Florida to go watch him perform, So for me, I guess the pressure to perform and to perform for Dana White, who obviously at times has, well, maybe not so obviously, but has been one of my maybe harsher critics internally and is a very demanding boss. And I think, too, for a fan base that really watches this sport closely, you know, I want to be perfect. And as I said, I'm 0 for 10 years in terms of being perfect. And then I think there's also just some anxiety as a father of 3 kids, 10 and under, being away 100 nights a year, having to lean on my 70-year-old mother and a babysitter because my wife's teaching. There's just so much that goes into it. And I have ways to, you know, self-medicate and get myself in a good place. And thankfully, I haven't had to miss any shows. But to sit here and tell you in 2022 that I don't have any mental health issues, I think would be ignorant. Like, there are mental health things that I believe I am dealing with, you know.
I think every high performer is, honestly. I wouldn't say that I don't, that I'm sure I qualify for you know, if you read, we're on DSM-5 now, the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual for, you know, mental health. And I read DSM-4 because I'm old and, you know, I had a minor in psychology in college. So, yeah, everybody who's doing something, you know, significant or unique, that's not a normal person. They're going to have some abnormalities or quirks in their personality. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. The last thing I ever wanted to be in life was normal.
Right.
I didn't want to fit in with the 50th percentile people. I worked very hard to make sure that I grew up well below that 50th percentile. I wanted to make sure as an adult I'm way above the 99th percentile. That I don't want to be at the 99th percentile of people. You know, I guess from my perspective, I'm not a person that's, and I know that you use the term loosely, but for me personally, I don't want a bunch of fans. I couldn't give it, you know, a fan is somebody, if you think of that root word as like a fanatic, is like, which like by definition means like a weirdo stalker type personality. I'd like to have less weirdo stalkers in my life. I get enough weird messages and weird communications with people that approach me at times, which 85% are very pleasant, but the other 15% I could certainly do without. So in my head, you know, I'd like to have clients that are people that I identify with, people that I respect, people that I can learn something from myself, from my clients. So when I think about work ethic or you know, my own mental preparation for if I have an event where I'm meeting with clients for a few days, again, these are people that I respect. It's people that I like them. I know them personally, and I feel a significant interest in helping them do better. They trusted me above other people to help them with a problem, and I need to solve that fucking problem.
Right.
They came to me to help them solve a problem, and you know, it's harder to get new clients than it is to maintain existing clients. So if somebody came for me to help them, and I helped them, you know, more than they expected, are they going to buy something else from me?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and you know what else then? As long as I deliver the goods consistently, they're going to continue to give me money. Some of my clients give me hundreds of thousands of dollars, individual people. I help some of those people make millions of dollars.
Right.
But you know, if I can help somebody make a couple $1 million, or you know,
I need help. Can we talk after the interview?
I think we can work. We could talk.
Yeah.
I think we could work something out. I always feel inside a pressure, if you want to say that, to perform. I don't feel anything when I go on a stage or when I go in front of the people, but I did the goddamn work.
Right.
And I'm not one of these internet people that talks about something that they didn't do. Like, you know, I teach 3 things. I teach people about entrepreneurship. I teach people about real estate. I teach people about global markets, primarily the stock market, you know. And guess what? I made over $10 million in each of those individual things that I lived the life that I'm talking about. Yeah. And I've been living that life for 35 years. So it's not weird that, you know, if I'm talking about entrepreneurship, I made my first entrepreneurial dollar when I was 7. Amazing. And I'm 42. Amazing. So I lived my whole life that way. So I don't feel any anxiety when I go talk to people about it. No, you know, if I had to go talk about something I don't know anything about, I wouldn't put myself in that position.
Of course.
But if I had to give tennis lessons, I don't know.
Yeah. No, and I think that's fair. And candidly, like this past weekend was the least sort of nervous, for lack of a better word, I had ever been to do my UFC pay-per-view open, which is sort of my big moment of the night. Why? Because I had a fucking rib injury that was consuming me, so I wasn't thinking about what I was doing. I was hoping my body was actually going to get through it. But in terms of fans, right, and I have read that like the most basic human need is to feel appreciated. I'm no psychologist. But I guess for me, it's like my future employment isn't inexorably linked to my public approval rating. But But like it or not, we're in a social media era. And if the fan base doesn't support me and like me, eventually that's going to trickle back to the boss. And some of those thoughts are going to be constructive. And some of that criticism is going to be real. And I might be out of a job, you know? So I don't need the fan base to love me. Certainly when I started, they fucking hated me, to a man, to a woman. But you know, I don't necessarily, I think when you have children and they become the center of your life, that is very liberating. So I'm not the center of my own life anymore. I feel like my children are. And so now that has given me a lot of balance and perspective, as trite as that sounds. You know, a negative comment on social media doesn't resonate with me the way it did before I had kids. So
yeah, when I get plenty of, you know, people write little negative comments or say little things, and I always think to myself, like, have you ever met a hater that was doing significantly better than you?
Right.
You ever been hated on by somebody that was doing significantly better than you?
Right.
Because I never had that experience.
Yeah.
I never had that.
Yeah.
And then I think to myself, well, what's the number one thing that a hater really hates? Oh, themselves.
Yeah.
And if you think about the truth of that, it's like, that's the truth.
Right.
Like, a person that has, you think, you know, Ngannou, you know, keeps his belt last week. So Ngannou, you know, defeats Cyril Gane by decision. 5 rounds, good fight. I thought it was a great fight. Some people criticize, not enough action. Why don't one of those people go in just one round? Why don't they just fight with either of those guys for one round and see how they feel about it, see how it works out, you know? But, you know, do you think Ngannou, you know, retains his belt and then afterwards, like, you know, man, I can't wait to go hate on some fucking random people on the internet. I can't wait to go hate on Instagram.
It's crazy. And I think, like, how many times as a diehard sports fan in Boston, and there were maybe a couple play-by-play guys that I didn't like, but to ever be motivated to go online and not just be constructive with the criticism of a sports television announcer, but to really take shots either at their family or otherwise, you know, you gotta really have some stuff in your own kitchen worth cleaning up if that's your purpose at this point, you know. So.
When I've dealt with that, when I've had like hecklers and audiences, I'll tend to engage with them because I know if we talk for a while, like there'll be people that'll want to hush them or sit them down, or people that'll, you know, try to social pressure them out of the room. And there's a point where I kick people out of the room. But, you know, I found it more entertaining for the audience and more useful to the audience. Like if I just debate them for a little bit or communicate with them, like the depth of their intelligence starts to show pretty soon, you know? And that's very powerful in a live audience that, you know, and again, you're not in that context, you know, in a conference room, you know, you control the cameras. Nobody's going to do some creative editing and make it something that's not. So I just find it useful if I do that live. You know, anybody that's I never seen that communication go well for them for any extended period of time.
That's a nice way to put it. You're making me want to go see you live when you have a show full of hecklers, honestly.
You should come do a chat with me sometime. We should do a live something sometime.
That'd be fun.
You'd be a great guest speaker. Tito was a guest speaker at one of my events recently. And then I think Mr. Buffer, he and I, we have a call. We might include this or not include it, depending. But Buffer and I are talking tomorrow, and I want him to come to a future event. So we have a call set up for tomorrow. But yeah, maybe that's another thing to consider, actually.
Beauty.
So I guess a summary statement about that is just that, you know, if a critic had any skills, they wouldn't have time to be a critic. They'd be doing something themselves. They'd be doing something meaningful or impactful in some way themselves.
I think that's fair. And I would also sort of add to that I can't totally ghost the social media thing. Now, if you're on a level like my broadcast partner, and by the way, my broadcast partner is more famous than yours, Joe Rogan's his name. But if you're Joe Rogan, I can understand why you need to post and ghost, right? There's just too much volume in terms of the comments, right? But for me, after a pay-per-view, I do go on social media. I look at my mentions. Obviously, if there's hate, I'm able to ignore it, but there's also constructive criticism out there. I mean, legitimately, I was mispronouncing Tijuana 7 years ago, right? I learned that on social media from a Mexican who told me it's not Tijuana, right? So if you totally seal that off, you know, then maybe you're preventing yourself from actually letting some constructive things in. But it is an inconvenient truth of my business, social media. There's no doubt about it that it is not something that I enjoy.
Shout out to Joe Rogan. I know you're watching right now.
Yep, he is watching.
Love you, Joe.
Let's go, Joe.
I try to learn new things every day. I was just chatting with another guest earlier, and you were talking about the lifetime learning, essentially. That the smartest people that I know and the most talented people that I know, they want to learn new things every day. And some of the dumbest people that are slithering about the earth, they tend to think they know everything already. They're not so open-minded about being corrected or learning something. So I've made it a habit that I had this thought in my head maybe 3 decades ago, like the more you learn, the more you can earn. That there's a correlation there. That the wealthiest people or the most successful people in the world don't tend to be dummies. They tend to have a decent level of education.
Yeah.
So I didn't have good mentors growing up, and I really had a lack of mentors. I had good negative role models where there were people around me that were doing terrible things that I could be like, this smoke and crack thing, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a good lifestyle.
Maybe I shouldn't do that.
Yeah, it's probably that's not the right path forward for me. It seems inconsistent with my goals or higher aspirations. Right. So I had role models of that nature around that. That was useful in a bizarre way, or it might not be easily relatable or identifiable to somebody, but that's useful to see things that are so awful that you're like, well, I'm never going to do that, and I'm never going to do that, and I'm never going to do that. So that doesn't solve the problem of what should you do, but it helps you avoid some pitfalls that, those people, if they had that thought, I'm never going to do that, they could have avoided some problems for themselves. So I was a high school dropout, So in high school, I either had like an A or a D. So if I liked the class, I'd pay attention, I could get an A. Yeah. And if I didn't like the topic, or I didn't like the teacher, I wouldn't do the work. Yeah. And usually they'd still give me a D because they're just like, this fucking kid, just get him out of here. Yeah. But I dropped out of high school eventually, so I had to go to community college for a couple of years. And that was a bit of a wake up where I was like, if you can't do this well, you're not going to do anything good in your life. And if you can't outcompete people at your community college, nothing wrong with community college. Sure. That's just where I was at the moment, If that's where you're at, nothing wrong with that. But fucking do well there, Right. I thought, if I can't outcompete these people, like, am I supposed to be at Harvard? Or I went to University of Chicago later, which when I was there was the #1 ranked MBA program out of 416. Yeah. But am I going to be in an Ivy League school or a top business program if I can't outcompete my community college people? Yeah. So I made sure that I wanted to do the work. I wanted to apply that work ethic and just do as best I could with my circumstance. And the more that I learned from teachers and then found real life practitioners, that people that did things in real life have been the best teachers for me, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have tried as I've gotten older to step out of my comfort zone in terms of my learning and things that I will do. I've never had a great entrepreneurial spirit, and now I'm trying to do more things on my own as far as that is concerned, whether it's with merchandise or other things. But yeah, it is interesting, the whole wisdom thing, because when I was 27, I thought like I knew everything, and man, that dude was like such a fucking idiot, and here I am at 43 and realizing that it is a constant evolution, but yeah, I mean, I was sort of the BD guy. I was never the AD guy like you. I'd get B's in the classes that I would do well, and I'd get a D- in microeconomics. But if I had listened to people like you when I was 27, for example, like I started studying for my, for the GMAT, that I told you off the air that I didn't think I could pass. So I went to broadcasting school instead of going to get my MBA. But I do believe if I was mentally stronger and more focused in my 20s that I could have passed the GMAT, right? I mean, it's an application thing. I wasn't applying myself in the right way. I didn't know how to study back then. I wouldn't have known how to prep for a UFC pay-per-view back then,
Well, the GMAT is, that's just an active discipline. Even that, I went and got, I took a course, we're in Miami at the moment, and I took a course in Sunny Isles, Florida. I took a course in Las Vegas. I took another 2 prep courses in Chicago. So I took 4 prep courses, and then hired a private tutor. And, maybe I could have figured it out by myself, but I would have spent 6 months instead of like 6 weeks. Right. So to get my, look, there's a limited amount of information on that exam that there's only so many permutations and combinations of answer that after you've recognized the patterns and you know what to do, you're good. Yeah. So, even that was an example where I'm like, well, maybe it's going to take me 6 or 8 months to figure this, read a $30 book at home and self-study, and I could figure it out. I get a good enough IQ that I do pretty good, but I don't think I would have done as good as I did. Yeah. And, it would have spent me, a lot of extra time. Yeah. Yeah. I think your time's your most valuable asset. Yeah. I don't want to waste time.
Yeah, and I think I was at a time too in my life where I didn't have anything resembling resources. I was trying to figure out how to pay my $600 rent per month in Newton, Massachusetts, studying for these GMATs, taking a bong hit before I fucking studied. I mean, it was a mess. But here we are, I went to broadcasting school, and it was a lot cheaper than business school. It was like 12 G's, and here we are.
Well, you're having a lot more fun, and you're probably more financially prosperous as well than most of my MBA classmates. So
Well,
you're having a lot more
thanks.
fun than they are. You're having a lot better life.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. No, there's nothing like this gig. I mean, as much as I would like to scratch that NFL itch, I think before all is said and done, as far as my broadcasting career is concerned, I have my dream job right now. I mean, even though I absolutely hate, as a former homesick camper, being away from my kids 100 nights a year, like it really mentally wears on me. It's rare at 43 to have the job that you want and to hope that you can have it forever. So, Dana, I know you're watching, man. Let's do a new deal, my man. Let's go.
Uncle Dana, I was 9 days ago. I was at Apex Center, and Dana and I had a chat. We were in the
Nice.
ring together at Apex. So,
You got to sit down with UFC President Dana White.
he passed me over to his PR people, and
Yeah. All right.
no. In fairness, Dana, he's got a bunch of people that want to talk to him, and I chatted with him. We met once before, so only the second time that we ran into each other. And he did take 2 minutes of his life to stop everything he was doing and let other people wait. And he walked me across Apex and found the right PR person to introduce me to.
Good.
And we had a conversation. So I got to follow up about that.
Well, no,
and
you leave
see
an
where that
impression,
goes.
and I think he would enjoy talking to you. And you can be sure he doesn't enjoy doing every single one of these. So.
I'm sure he does. I think, on a sincere note, I think some people are mean about Dana. I'm like, build a better business yourself. If you think the guy's not doing a great job, build a better business yourself if you think it's easy. So
he's the greatest promoter in combat sports history. I don't say that because he's my boss,
No, I think he's been my impression is, and I don't know the man well, but my impression is he's been loyal to a lot of people that were loyal to him. He's generally a loyal guy. Hardworking. He didn't accidentally do what he did.
Right.
Didn't accidentally build what he did there. And he's in a tough spot. That no matter what he does, there's going to be some criticism. Right. No matter what he does, he's in a spot where you can't please everyone. You know. So, again, I don't know the man well, but my impression from the distance is he's in a pretty extraordinary job from where he came from and how his life went. Yeah. Did a pretty extraordinary job building that up.
That is not a misread by you. That's accurate. And real quick, I'll be efficient when I say this, but in terms of the loyalty, April of 2020, when the pandemic seemingly was at its worst in the United States, he had our entire staff ready to go to Lemoore, California to put on a live event. Now, I'm here living in South Florida, trying to figure out with my wife, all right, I'm going to fly to Denver and then to Fresno and then rent a car. And you couldn't rent a car at that point in time. But we didn't care. We were just logistically trying to get there for the guy because he was trying to keep us working when most people weren't working.
I read an article about Dana that one of the Las Vegas newspapers was criticizing, his handling of the COVID thing, and his general response to it was, I spent a lot of my life in Vegas. I built a business in Vegas, and during that time we laid off nobody. He said that he took cuts in his bonuses, that he took less of a check, fired nobody, and tried to keep the organization in order, and then cursed out the reporter, of course, that wrote a negative article criticizing him, and more or less said, you're never coming to my fucking shows again, and sincerely, fuck you.
Yeah.
So that was the essence of the communication, if not word for word. But that stuck to me. That as a business owner, that's a tough decision to make. That you're going to take money out of your pocket, but make sure that you kept the organization intact and you kept the people that wanted to be there are still there. So.
Yeah. And for me, as a full-time UFC employee, right, anything that I say, people are going to assume I'm saying it just because they cut my check. But, I mean, look at what he did relative to the other sports. And I'm sitting here thinking, as the NBA tries to get its fucking bubble going and everything else, and I probably am never going to work for the NBA now after saying it like that. But
and neither am I.
But, heaven forbid, the NBA commissioner or his staff call Dana and get some intel as to how they're executing these events, is MMA still the redheaded stepchild that you can't call Dana and see what's going on, because he's getting live events on, and if that's the goal, why isn't anybody reaching out to him, So we will always take a tremendous amount of pride in what we were all able to execute when the world was seemingly stopped. And there's going to be this entire UFC era that is title fights in a UFC Apex with no fans, and it's visceral and everything else. And even though there were some tremendous challenges, it's an amazing time in UFC history that we're all going to look back on fondly because he was ready to go when nobody else wanted to do anything. So
in my business, when I think about investments, during that whole time where there's a lot of turmoil in the stock market of 2020, the market's going down dramatically. It's down about 30%. Some stocks were down 80, 90%, and I get really excited because I'm a nerd, and I spent my whole life being a nerd, and I'm good with numbers, and I look at the numbers, and those are fantastic times in my life when people are acting hysterical to just be halfway rational, have a bit of calmness, and look at it and say, well, what's really going on here? And you mentioned preparation earlier of doing your homework or doing that research is my interpretation of some of what you were saying. And I just sat around. This isn't like exciting times for most people. It sounds miserable for most people. But in the second half of March and most of April of 2020, I was probably averaging 4 hours of sleep. And I'd print out 500 pages of financial statements and sit around on my couch and look at balance sheets and look at financial statements, and I'd leave the news on, not because you actually learn anything on the news, but it gives you a sense in the background of how the public is perceiving reality at that time, and the general emotional tenor. When you hear on the news horror movie music in the background that purports to be objective news, but they're playing horror movie music for 150 days, So that's useful information to have of the reality that they're creating for the common person.
I didn't think about it that way.
Oh, it's true, yeah. And they go out of their way to be color commentators in a negative way. So in any case, I spent a lot of time sitting around. It looks miserable. It looks boring. You had to do the prep work ahead of time. That's not a good time to learn accounting. That's not a good time to learn finance. But if you already spent a lot of time in the past that you learned about accounting, you learned about finance, you understand how businesses are managed, you understand how the economy works in general, then that's a fantastic time to be using that previous knowledge and previous learnings. And you have to learn new things, but I have to give myself a crash course of what is the state of these couple hundred businesses that I need to study. And to your point about being precise in pronouncing a name or learning those little details, there's things that I had to learn that hey, I got to go ask. And it's not a good time to build your social network then either. You have to have people. You had to do the work ahead of time to have the right things in your name, to have the right in your brain, to have the right social network. That I have other smart people. Hey, what's your take on this? Hey, you know more about this than I do. What are your thoughts here? I think you must have an analog to that in your preparation, that you learn an awful lot of things ahead of time.
Yeah.
And if what you don't know, you're going to go find out.
Yeah. I mean, I am your prototypical male. When I used to get lost, I wouldn't like to stop and ask for directions, but I will ask for help in almost any other walk of life. I cut my teeth at a small radio station in Burlington, Massachusetts, where I was not only the update guy and the afternoon drive host, but I was also the program director. And I was having to do all these things, and I was having to lean into maybe skill areas that weren't strengths, and I had no choice but to ask for help. Then I get to Bristol, Connecticut at ESPN, and it's a whole new television system. And I had to be the most ignorant anchor on the entire roster. And had I not been willing to sort of seek help from all those people, I would have absolutely crumbled in that environment. Then I get to the UFC. And I'm a little bit timid. UFC President Dana White is my boss. He's handpicked me from ESPN. They're doubling their schedule, and they're giving me 20 play-by-play events, right? And so I show up, and I leave behind in Bristol, Connecticut, not just ESPN, but the infrastructure, ESPN stats and information. Anytime I needed fucking anything, you had this whole research team. So I get to the UFC, and I get my first fight card. And the fighter's name is Nick Denis. Spelled Denis. I think it's Nick Denis. Might be Nick Dennis. It's I don't want to be the new guy asking for shit, but it's do you guys have a pronunciation guide? No pronunciation guide at the UFC when I arrived there in 2011. So if you go back, Stipe Miocic is the consensus greatest UFC heavyweight of all time, most accomplished. Go back and watch his UFC debut. They call him fucking Stipe Miocic, right? Now, I'm not sitting here taking credit for affecting that change, but I remember acutely asking for a pronunciation guide in 2011 when we didn't have one. You fast forward 11 years, and now we have an audio file of every single fighter saying their name to tape. So had I just sort of gone with the status quo and done the best I could, maybe we wouldn't have the great system that we have today. So thankfully for me, I've never been one who is too shy about his weaknesses, and I'm always willing to go find the smarter people out there like you, because my IQ is probably not that high. Let's not do an IQ test after the fucking show today, okay? Great.
I think you don't give yourself enough credit for the brilliant things that you do, or the brilliance in communication that you have. I think literally you and Rogan have been there forever. That Rogan's been there since about near the beginning, yeah. And you've been his partner. You're sitting next to him for the last decade, and the way that you bring things to life in people's living rooms around the world, and you're not giving yourself enough credit. So if anything that's lacking in IQ is certainly made up for in many other ways. That I think you bring a lot more vibrance and detail to the sport, and you're not giving yourself fair credit.
Well, that means a lot, because I know you listen and watch closely. And I think as our relationship grows, you would probably tell me about my deficiencies maybe one day too. So we'll see. He hasn't been super critical of my broadcasting yet, so maybe that's at the end. We'll see.
So, John, you have your own podcast. What are the main topics on there? Who's the right person in my audience who should also follow Jon Anik and check out your podcast and what you're up to?
So I think, and I appreciate that, I think a lot of people in the public eye feel sort of perpetually misunderstood. And when people see me on a UFC telecast, I wear a necktie, even though they don't make Joe Rogan and Daniel Cormier wear a tie for whatever reason. I don't know what's going on there. But, I think people at times, if they have been critical, maybe have thought I've been a little bit stiff or robotic. And certainly now with 10 years to improve my skills, I think maybe there are less of those tendencies. But my podcast allows me to be the guy that I am here. I've never cussed on live television, and hopefully I don't in the future. But, I grew up, fuck was out of my mouth every other word, so it's nice to be able to be myself, to be able to connect with the UFC audience in a way that I don't connect with them on a telecast, so they can actually see who I am. But our podcast is very much meat and potatoes. It really is recapping UFC events, giving you predictions for the next event. Ray Longo is a staple of our show. He's a crazy New Yorker, and because two Boston guys host the show, we felt like we needed like a New Yorker to balance things out a little bit. But it's a labor of love. It will always be free. Of that I can assure you. Even as we pursue licensing deals, I will never put the thing behind a paywall as long as I live. I feel like it's the best way for me to not just connect with fans, but to give back, because I've been so supported by this fan base over the last several years that to give them free content after a UFC live event, I feel like is a good way for me to give back. So going strong, 7 years in April. So.
Let's talk about One More Sleep. You got a whole movement going on, One More Sleep.
Well, again, it originated organically. I used to say don't text and drive when I would sign off the air at ESPN, and they wanted me to keep saying it because it resonated with people. But I was walking off the stage doing a UFC weigh-in or on social media. I forget the exact point of origin, but sometimes in TV, maybe you have a little more time to kill. So you're not just signing off. You might insert something else. And I said, one more sleep. We'll see you tomorrow night. And then I said it again, and people really started to respond to it, so much so that when I was at a hotel in Arizona, when fans started coming back after the pandemic, I walk into a hotel and the fans just started chanting, one more sleep. And so the bells kind of went off. And so we started selling One More Sleep merchandise, and we had some success with it. And, now I can't escape it, so we're in the process of trying to trademark it for commercial use. And we did so well with the sales with this company, Millions, that we got a billboard in Times Square, which was, I think, cooler for my parents than me, because I'm a Boston guy. We don't like New York. So Times Square for me, I'm a Boston sports fan. I don't like New York. But no, it's been cool. It's been fun. And it's sort of a little bit of a calling card right now, maybe more so than my 209 tattoo even. So we'll take it.
You brought up the 209. So I by the way, I did see your billboard. I saw it on social media, and I haven't been in New York this month, but I saw you on the NASDAQ building. They got a picture of you wrapped in the billboard of the NASDAQ building. So that's dope. Yeah. I've done events there in Times Square, but I never had my face on a billboard there yet. So yet. Billboard. I wasn't going to bring it up, but you brought it up. So what is the origin of this 209 tattoo, sir? Well,
not the only tattoo bet I've done in my life. The only one I've lost, if you want to consider this a loss. But I want to tell this efficiently because it's sort of a long story. But sort of dovetailing with the point about the podcast and me being liberated and being able to be myself, my background in radio is such that we used to do a lot of crazy bits on the radio. So I called Kenny Florian before Conor McGregor was to fight Nate Diaz. It was a short notice fight for Nate Diaz. And I said, hey, I think I'm going to get a 209 tattoo in honor of the Diaz brothers if Nate loses this fight. And Kenny's like, or if he wins the fight, excuse me. And Kenny was like, dude, you're crazy. What are you doing? What does your wife say? I was like, yeah, she's not thrilled, but I'm doing it, Nick Diaz was my favorite fighter. I had always wanted to get a tattoo. I'm an area code guy. I like numbers, So I wanted to get a 209 tattoo, and I wanted to think of a creative way to get it. I also thought Nate Diaz was up against it in this fight because he was drinking tequila in Cabo while Conor McGregor was smack dab in the middle of training camp. So I thought it would help bring some attention to the podcast. I thought it would be funny. What I didn't think was that it would get on Nate Diaz's radar during fight week. I didn't think this would be like inadvertently the most I've ever done to promote a UFC pay-per-view in my life. So I get a call from my boss, Craig Borsari. He's like, what happened on the podcast, And I was like, oh, just do me the service of at least listening to it. And he's like, well, I don't know what's going to happen. I'll call you back after I talk to Dana and Lorenzo. So there were a couple hours there where I thought legitimately I might lose my job. Because as a play-by-play guy, I'm not trying to get on the radar of an athlete, especially I'm not even calling the pay-per-views at that point in time. All's well that ends well. Obviously, as many of your viewers may know, Nate Diaz won the fight. We got the 209 tattoo, and it's sort of been a badge of honor since. I was very thankful to see Nate a few months after, and he took a video of the tattoo, and all's well that ends well. But yeah, there were a few hours there where I thought maybe my job was in jeopardy, and I haven't predicted a fight since, and I think that was the lesson learned. Even though I wasn't calling the big fights, I was still predicting them on my podcast, which probably at that stage of my career I shouldn't have been doing. So that's been the big sort of learning lesson for me, no longer picking any fights. But it was fun, and I can assure you it's not the last tattoo bet that I'm going to do. It won't be based upon an outcome anymore, but it won't be the last one we do.
Let me ask you, you had a lot of experience doing what you're doing. There must be somebody earlier in life, for you to be as successful as you are, that you must have had a teacher or a mentor or somebody that you looked at in broadcasting and that you looked up to that you wanted to emulate that path in some way. Do you have a story like that in the background in your life?
I've had a lot of people above me, more talented or smarter or otherwise, that have helped me. Ryan Russillo is sort of a national media personality, works for The Ringer, has his own podcast. And he was a guy who I was able to watch work. When I was hosting a radio show, he was my co-host, early 2000s. And I saw him work like a dog. And I think that instilled a lot of the, I guess not the work ethic, but the how to prepare to do sports, that as soon as we get off the air, like you're going home and you're watching these games and you're watching the Red Sox and you're taking notes, like it or not, because somebody's going to call you the next day and say something about what happened in the fifth inning and you better be prepared. So I love Ryan Russillo as far as sort of teaching me how to work. But Sean McDonough was the play-by-play guy that I sort of always listened to. He was the Red Sox play-by-play growing up for me. He did a lot of other different sports. He does a lot of national work for ESPN right now. But he was no frills, but his personality would come out every now and again. But he was clean. He was consistent. And there was just an undeniable energy in his voice that brought me to the table. So Sean was the guy that I looked up to from afar. His father, Will McDonough, may he rest in peace, was a Boston Globe columnist. And when I was on a print journalism path, I always looked up to Will McDonough. So the McDonough family, as a Boston kid, had a profound impact on me.
Do you ever see anybody that's a top performer or high-level performer even in their area that didn't have a great coach or mentor earlier in their life?
Yeah, no, probably not, right? I mean, the thing is, natural ability is a very funny saying, right? Because the most famous saying is LeBron James saying, I'm going to take my talents to South Beach. And I'm like, look at this guy, look at this guy. I'm going to take my talents to South Beach, Natural ability or having God-given talent, there's a lot of people who don't like to hear that, And I think whatever you believe is your own natural ability, you got to open your eyes and ears and listen to people that either have more of it or you're not going to get any better,
I think there's a tremendous number of people that had natural ability and don't do much with it.
Yeah.
And if I look back, say even in graduate school, I probably had an average IQ there. There's a lot of really smart people there, and they make a couple of admit errors, but not too many. And if I look at the outcomes that my classmates had, that they wanted an upper middle class job, And there's a lot of times I make more money in a day than they make in a year.
Yeah.
And sometimes I lose more money in a day than they make in 3 years.
Sure.
And I'm okay with that volatility.
Right.
But I think that finding practitioners, it's just my life philosophy, that anything new that I want to get good at, I want to find the best coaches, the best trainers, mentors, teachers.
Yeah.
And you can't have your time back, even if you could kind of figure it out by yourself, the amount of time that takes, it'd take you 10 times as long to have 50% of the results you could have had.
I probably wish I had gone to a voice coach at one point in time. When I first showed up at ESPN, it's not as though they put you through some vocal testing per se, but you kind of either get put in the pile of people who need a voice coach or don't. And I wasn't necessarily someone who needed a voice coach. And I've found my voice over the years. I mean, the whole tone and tenor of my voice has changed. I can't hit notes singing that I used to be able to hit because of all the damage to my voice, either calling championship fights or voicing video games, which is the bane of my existence, So I have had to find my voice, but I wish that I had had vocal coaching when I was in my formative years as a broadcaster.
I talked to a very famous singer. I don't want to say his name because it was kind of a private conversation, but he's very well known. He's one of the singers, one of the biggest rock bands ever. And we talked about voice. It's one of the things that we had in common. We had dinner together recently, and we were chatting about construction work because we both had remodeling projects recently. And then we were talking about voice. And I spent so much time on stage, and I didn't have that vocal coach either, and I regret that. There was 16, 18 months of my life where I just lose my voice because I was talking so much for so many days that your voice, it cracks and goes out at some point, And I went through a lot of unnecessary, physical pain and psychological frustration of having a very sore throat that I really could have avoided if I would have had a right coach for that as well. He made a comment, the private part of this conversation, that he made a comment that, because he wasn't touring for a period of time through, 2020 and 2021, that, when you went back to singing again, that you would try to go full force when you haven't been doing that, and your voice can't do it anymore. That you have to rework that muscle and build that firmness back. And he said there's a lot of other people in his industry that are very well-known people that damage their vocal cords. That some of them are going to have permanent injuries because they tried to do what they could have easily done 18 months earlier, but they weren't they didn't have the right preparation in the recent times to be able to belt it out like that. So. Even in that context, I think the same thing. That anything new that I want to do, any new skill that's going to help improve my life in some way, or my personal happiness, I want to find the best coaches, the best mentors. There's a price to pay for not doing that, and for a person that uses their voice or any other tools for their profession, it's really negligent to not.
Oh yeah, I still don't use my diaphragm 100% properly, but when I first started for the UFC, I was like seeing stars after calling certain seminal moments and like on the verge of like blacking out, right? I remember one time I was doing a show in Fortaleza, Brazil, right on the equator, not a climate controlled arena, rat infested arena. And I'm punctuating a finish and I'm not breathing at all or properly. And I started seeing stars. And thankfully my broadcast partner took the baton because for 10 seconds I had to get my stuff together. So thankfully those instances now are few and far between, but it used to happen a lot.
I'm going to put you on the spot right before we end here. Give us one good gritty story like that where you're in, tough circumstances, on the equator, rat infested, etc. Give us one gritty story that maybe you were sick, maybe something was going on in your life, but you pulled it together, you did an A+ performance, and everything came out great despite some obstructions.
Yeah, well, certainly the shows in Brazil, I've done 27 shows in Brazil. Those have a lot of challenges, right? The arenas oftentimes are not air conditioned. They might be rat infested and empty 2 weeks before we get there. There are technical challenges. We might not have the same equipment for a broadcast. I remember doing a show for Bellator back in the day in 2009, sickest I've ever been on the air. I don't know how I got through that broadcast. I remember getting back to my hotel. I literally collapsed. And I don't mean collapse like pass out, but just opened the hotel room door in my full suit, just passed out on the rug. But candidly, this past week, I suffered a rib injury. Daniel Cormier and I were sort of messing around, and I spent 4 hours on the physical therapy table getting acupuncture, cupping, random injections, massages, because I was having a real hard time with my rib cage and breathing just to get through that pay-per-view. So that was a particular challenge that's fresh on the mind. But those doing a broadcast in 104-degree Brazilian heat over 8 hours is a real challenge, and not one that I would wish on anyone. It's really challenging. We barely get through those shows.
Well, what a professional is somebody that gets results consistently, despite if they might be in a bad mood.
Yeah.
They might have a little upset tummy, might have a little headache, the temperature might be uncomfortable. What a professional is somebody that gets results consistently, despite the circumstances. And if you think of, a doctor, for instance, imagine a doctor. I think of a doctor or a lawyer as like, professionals. Imagine you go to the ER with a bad injury, and the doctor's, oh, hey man, I'd love to help you with that compound fracture, and I see that blood shooting out of your arm. That's pretty bad, bro. But I was just about to go to lunch.
Right. All right.
So I think about that in my life, and I think you certainly embody that and live your life that way. That a person that gets professional results, it doesn't mean it's all easy and pretty. It means that you make it look easy and pretty, despite difficult circumstances and obstructions.
I think you put that well. Yeah, and you think about how many people I let down if I can't do the job. Sometimes I think, man, if I hurt like my hand and can't type, it's a massive inconvenience for my producers during a pay-per-view week. If I'm late today, you have your whole staff, people count on you. And I think, it's trite to say the best ability is availability, but if I can knock on wood, I've never had to miss a show, in 10 years. And, I have filled in for a guy in that span when he couldn't make the walk. So,
well, I love listening to you. I think you add so much to the sport and to the audience experience at home. My biggest complaint of going to the live shows, I've been to a lot of the live shows recently, and I love hearing the commentary from you guys. And sometimes it's you have a different experience, or there's a richness of being there live, but you lack the richness of hearing your wisdom and insights, and the wisdom and insights of your co-hosts. So I really appreciate what you do. I have a lot of respect for you, and thank you very much for taking some time to chat with me and share some of your life stories with the audience.
My man, it's been an honor to get to know you, and I congratulate you on all your success. And we got to get those UFC radios back in the arena so that people can actually hear them. Because if you go to a hockey or basketball game, they got the commentary piping in all the bathrooms, and just a little flavor for people. But I appreciate you saying that.
We'll talk to Uncle Dana when we see him again.
Yeah, you got to get him on camera. That's an eventuality. That's happening.
Dana, have your people call me.
Ha!
I'll talk to you soon. Thank you, John.
Thanks, my man.
I was living on my coach's living room on a mattress. I ended up just bouncing at a bar. I'd been a cop. I quit my job. And
Derek Moneyberg presents 10 Commandments of Wealth.
Took the gamble on myself to become a successful professional fighter and make it to the UFC or Pride. And at the time,
am I making a sacrifice right now, or am I just investing in a better future? So it's easier for me to make those decisions when I think about it. Is like, oh,
yeah, absolutely. And now that you mention it, having to actually really process and think about it, I think that word sacrifice is kind of like, I believe it's the word that the ones at the top kind of use to make everyone else feel better about it. Because when you're at the top, now you realize that was an investment.
Was everything just golden and easy and handed to you, or do you have a little struggle yourself along the way?
No. Yeah, in 2013 and 2015, I was living out of my car, full time, and I was too proud to ask for help. Like, how ridiculous is that? You're living out of your car and you think you know it all. And 2015, that's when I kind of I knew that I didn't know it all. So why not find experts in that and really shortcut that? I thought I was going to just chip away. I thought I was just going to read books till I was an expert. I never really talked to anyone that actually did it.
It's been about a week since I've joined the 10 Commandments of Wealth program, and there's so many interviews that are offered in this program. I'm inside the Derek Moneyberg 10 Commandments of Wealth program. This is an awesome program that you're gonna love. I'm gonna use the principles and the knowledge from this program to help me boost my leads in my marketing firm. Buy this program, it's a wonderful investment for your future. You won't regret it, and you'll absolutely love it.